And I can say that the most common message I get from new students when I say, well, how was the meditation, is, well, my mind was really busy. I think a lot. Yeah. And I usually want to say, you and all of us, because our minds secrete thoughts like our bodies secrete enzymes. It's just what minds do. They think. It's part of survival. It's supposed to happen. It ensures survival. It ensures flourishing. So we're not trying to stop thoughts, and we're not trying to control thoughts. What we are intending is cultivating a wise relationship with thoughts. I sometimes imagine, like an airplane, when it goes through a cloud, how in the middle of the cloud, it's like the whole world is cloud. And it just seems like that's the universe. But then when it gets out of the cloud's in the field, but you just sense the vastness of what is. When we're inside a thought and we forget ourselves, we forget its forgetfulness, we forget the fullness of awareness, the whole world is shaped by that cloud. So how can we be aware of thinking? The classic line is that thinking is a very good servant and a very, very poor master. It's a good servant because we know it. If we're traveling, we need a map, we need GPS. Guidance is really, really helpful. If we want to build a building, we have to visualize it and see what it's going to look like. If we want to heal a disease, we have to sense the causation and drug interactions and what's an integrated approach that's good. We have to think about things. I definitely think a lot before I give these talks. And then part of me goes, okay, anything that really matters about this talk is not going to come through thinking, and then I try to stop thinking. It's like I have to have an experience and then try to put it into words. That's enough. I didn't mean to go there. But we have to, part of the spiritual path is the wise use of thought. In other words, we contemplate the metta meditation, the loving kindness meditation. It's a reflection on where goodness is. Compassion is a reflection on where vulnerability is. We use our minds to help turn us towards the light. But the thoughts aren't the thing itself. When thoughts are the master, it's because we're caught in obsessing, we're lost in them, they're driven by fear, they show up as judgment, and it's a prison. It's like you can sense that your body and mind is living in something smaller than the truth of who you are. Thinking then becomes, when it's a master, a prison. I remember some years ago working with a student, and he was very caught in self-judging thoughts. And he said he reminded himself of this tiger, this regal white tiger that he had visited in the Washington, D.C. National Zoo. The tiger's name was Mohini. And Mohini was put in this cage that was like about a 12 by 12 cage with iron bars and cement floor. And for years, Mohini would just go back and forth, pacing. You've seen how it happens in these tigers in cages in a zoo. And eventually what happened was the biologists and staff worked together to create this amazing natural habitat for her. Several acres at hills and a pond and, a variety of vegetation. So it was with a lot of excitement and anticipation that the staff brought Mohini to her new home. But it was too late, because when the tiger was released, she immediately sought refuge in a corner of the compound and just began pacing the same kind of pacing, 12 feet by 12 feet, back and forth. And she did that for the rest of her life, wearing bare this stretch of grass. So perhaps the biggest tragedy that we kind of sense in our lives is that freedom is possible And we sense this possibility of loving without holding back, and of really resting in a radiance and an awareness that's very open. We sense the possibility of presence in the moments. And we watch each day how we recontract and play out old patterns. So the tragedy feeling is, it's possible, but we get so habituated. So the key to unlocking the door, the key to opening us out of that prison, is to begin to bring a mindful attention to the patterns. So we're not just living in them and playing them out over and over. So mindfulness of thoughts means being aware of them, not being identified. And it enables us to realize, and this is the big thing, that thoughts are thoughts. They're not reality. And the biggest breakthrough, truly, the biggest breakthrough I see happening at retreats, and it just goes deeper and deeper, is this recognition: I don't have to believe my thoughts. I am not my thoughts. In other words, that self that my thoughts is telling me about is not me. It's the same thing, really, different expressions of it. So what we'll do is explore some key skillful means that help us to become more mindful of thinking, so we can realize what we are beyond thoughts. And the first is just a very simple, just to get us kind of deepening our attention to thinking. Again, I'd like to invite you to close your eyes and let your attention go within. And take a few breaths. Let yourself feel collected. Come right here. Just to imagine that you're like a cat by a mouse hole, and you're going to be counting whatever mice kind of peek out or run out. You're counting thoughts. And that in the next very short while, your only job is to notice the thoughts that come and just number them. So just feel yourself in your body, feel your breath, whatever helps you to know you're here, and know your intention is to count your thoughts. Okay, please begin. Okay, opening your eyes. Come on back. So let me check with you. How many of you had under 10? Okay, there's under 10 people who are there. How about 10 to 20? The 10 to 20 zone? 20 to 30? 30 to 40? Over 40? Over 100? So just to take a moment and sense, as you were being that cat by the mouse hole, what the thoughts actually were. How many of you had thoughts that came kind of audio like words or sound bites? Can I see by hands? I'm just curious. Okay. How many more had kind of images, maybe a background message or something, but more imagery? Yeah. How many were still shots? Movie? How many had kind of like a movie? Okay, so some of you noticed that it could be more in motion, kind of like a movie. Sometimes they're body-based. You might have noticed that you had a thought, but it was some impression, but you could really kind of feel the sense of it in your body. And some of you might have noticed that you had kind of sneaky thoughts, like, oh, it's getting quieter. Or, oh, just the naming of a number is a thought, right? Anybody get caught in that loop? Uh-huh. And sometimes they're emotionally tangly, like, I'm really not doing this right. I really don't, or some reaction to it. And then you start sensing that the thought comes with a lot of energy. So the deal is that thoughts are representations of reality. They come as, usually images, sound bites, some combination of it. The most important recognition, and this is the phrase that I like the best, is that thoughts are real, but they're not true. And by that I mean they're representations of reality. They really are happening, but they're not the reality itself. In other words, if you saw a photo of a tree or you had a thought of a tree, it wouldn't be the actual living tree that you know with its leaves budding and turning colors and falling off and swaying in the breeze or still, or the smell of blossoms or the feeling of the bark. It's not that, right? It's a representation. John Audubon said, if there's a difference between the bird and what the guidebook says, believe the bird, And some of you know that for many years I had a favorite t-shirt and it said meditation. It's not what you think. So when our minds are very busy, when we're in that incessant dialogue, we tend to conflate thoughts with reality. In other words, they're not in our mind representations, they're not a map. They are it. We're believing what's going on in our mind. So most styles of meditation begin by saying, let's get quiet a little. Not get rid of thoughts, but let's do something to collect the attention, like the breath, like scanning through the body, so that they're not taking over quite so much, so we can begin to be mindful of the fact that they're even happening. Okay, so we quiet a little. But then the next instructions deepen. And these are instructions for getting mindful of the thoughts themselves. And the first and major support that many people find helpful in mindfulness of thinking is to do a little bit of mental notation or naming. And you don't have to do a lot. It doesn't have to be like every single thought you're naming it. But you'll find that in the moment of naming a thought, it really loosens the identification with it. Clearly, it's a thought, not the reality itself. So you might name the type of thought. Okay, this is a worry thought. This is a planning thought. This is a remembering. Okay, you might say this is a judging thought, or I'm rehearsing again. A lot of us do a lot of rehearsing, or I'm figuring out, figuring out thoughts. Sometimes So we're just going to name them, sometimes fantasizing, daydreaming. But then if you'd like, for some of us, we have our top 10 hits, and we know what they are. It's like we know that we keep recycling, and it might be that your top 10, one of your top 10 is to do with work, or to do with a struggle with a colleague, or is to do with a romance or an infatuation that you're having, or to do with dieting, or to do with how you appear, or to do with redecorating, or remodeling. Or we have our top 10, right? So it's not to get rid of them, but to know they're happening, that you might say, okay, thoughts about sickness. I remember when I was struggling with sickness, I was constantly trying to figure out what was wrong with me and what would make me better. So I just called, sick person thinking. It's just like, okay, I'm that sick person trying to figure out my sickness. It helped. Gives a little bit of space, and then there's a little bit of choice, which is the whole deal. So the first step is a little bit of this naming. It's basically recognizing thinking is happening right now. And it's a very friendly, soft, non-judging recognition. If you recognize thinking and you carry with that a really big judgment, like this is a sign of bad meditatorship or something like that, In other words, if you start getting on your own case, all you've done is add another thought, a judging thought, that's really fear-based and just keeps on fueling reactivity. So part of the power of mindfulness is to recognize with really no judgment. Just recognize, okay, thinking. Some of you might remember this wonderful poem by Kaveri Patel. She writes this, she says, "There's a monkey in my mind, swinging on a trapeze, reaching back to the past, or leaning into the future, never standing still. Sometimes I want to kill that monkey, shoot it square between the eyes so I won't have to think anymore, or feel the pain of worry. But today, I thanked her, and she jumped down straight into my lap, trapeze still swinging, as we sat still." Do you have a sense of the attitude? Because this is what's key. As we cultivate mindfulness of our thoughts, one part of the attitude is be friendly. Just be friendly, it's just happening. Be curious, okay, thinking, and this is another virtual reality I'm creating. Be good-humored. They're really wacky. There's a saying that the mind has no shame. It goes anywhere, does everything. So that's the first part, is this kind of knowing it's happening, naming it. And the second part, you might call it letting go. I think of it more as if you're clutched onto a thought, as relaxing the grip and just reopening back into our senses. When we're thinking, we've left our senses. Check it out. When you come back from a thought, you'll notice that while you were thinking, you weren't in touch with your body. You weren't hearing the sounds that are actually happening right here. You weren't feeling whatever mood is going on. You were in a virtual reality. So we relax the clutch onto the thought, the contraction, and listen again. And feel in our body again. Let the senses be your home base. Come back, come back, come back. And here's a really, really valuable piece. Notice the difference between any thought and this mysterious, ever-changing aliveness that's right here. This presence that's here. Just notice the difference. When you come back from a thought, sometimes coming back will be really unpleasant. You'll be having a thought about something that's really agitating, and when you kind of let go of the content of thought and come into your body, you're going to have to actually directly contact the vulnerability and agitation. So the point isn't that when you let go of thoughts and come back into presence, it's all like crystal rainbows of light, and fun and pleasure. It's just whatever was going on. But it's the reality of the moment. It's the one place where we can begin to discover compassion. And in the space between the thoughts, that's the one place where wisdom can really begin to arise.